She entered an arranged marriage she never wanted, to a billionaire CEO who told her the cruelest thing a husband could ever say. He believed she would stay small, silent, invisible, but something is about to happen. Something that will flip their entire world, and the queen he never respected will soon become the woman he can't live without. Stay close. This story will break your heart, then put it back together. What changed him forever? Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories. Tell me, where are you watching from today? Who's been here since episode 1? I want to see my loyal family in the comments. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and join this journey, because the story we are about to dive into is full of pain, love, betrayal, and a rise so powerful. You'll never forget Megan Blackwood's name again. Let's get started. Megan stood beneath a ceiling dripping with chandeliers, each crystal reflecting her like a fractured version of the bride she was forced to become, her gown hugging her curves like a beautiful cage. Applause thundered around her, but inside she was as silent as a tomb. Every step down the aisle felt heavier than the last, each one a reminder that her freedom had been sold in exchange for her stepfamily's greed. She tried to keep her chin high, trying to look strong, trying to look worthy, but her heart thrashed inside her chest like it wanted to escape. Guests whispered admirations, a stunning black bride, skin glowing like warm bronze under golden lights, yet those compliments only deepened the ache, because the one person who should have admired her refused to look at her. James Blackwood, her soon-to-be husband, and the coldest man she had ever encountered, stood like a beautiful nightmare. Tall, sharp jaw, tailored suit, but his eyes were empty, dead, rejecting her without even trying to pretend. When she finally reached him, the officiant began speaking about love and destiny, but James's stare was fixed somewhere beyond her shoulder, like even acknowledging her existence would stain him. Megan's breath wavered, but she forced herself to grip his hand. It remained stiff and frozen, his skin warm, but his soul colder than the deepest winter. Then his lips barely moved as he whispered low enough only she could hear, his tone slicing through her heart. "This is a business arrangement. Nothing more. You're black. Not in my liking." The venom in those words burned hotter than fire, soaking into her bones until she feared she would collapse. Her eyes stung as humiliation surged up her throat, but she swallowed it down with every ounce of dignity she had left, because crying here would be victory for those who already doubted her. The ceremony continued like a cruel joke. James repeated his vows like a robot programmed to care about nothing, while Megan spoke hers with a trembling voice that tried to hold on to hope. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, confetti flew into the air and cheers echoed, but Megan felt like she was drowning. James barely brushed his lips against her cheek for their kiss, his touch colder than marble. As they walked out together, he refused to hold her arm properly, stepping ahead as though desperate to escape her. Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing a beautiful wedding, while the bride silently begged for the night to swallow her whole. The mansion that awaited her was massive and breathtaking, yet it radiated loneliness in every polished surface. Staff bowed with respect to James, but their eyes flicked at Megan with confusion. No introduction, no affection, no hint that she was loved here. The doors slammed shut behind them like a warning. James walked to a separate bedroom across the hall, not even pausing to explain. "There are rules in this house," he said sharply. "We fulfill obligations in public, but in private, stay out of my life." He didn't wait for her reply. He disappeared behind his door, leaving her standing in a dress that suddenly felt too heavy for her shaking legs. She entered her bedroom, gold accents, velvet curtains, a soft king-size bed, everything expensive but nothing comforting. A giant wedding portrait hung above the fireplace. James looked away from her in it, his face carved with disgust. The sight crushed her chest tighter than any corset ever could. Megan reached up and touched the frame, her fingertips trembling as she traced the cold distance between their figures. Was this all she was to him? A shadow he'd rather erase? Her phone buzzed, a message from her stepmother. "Remember why you're there. Do not disappoint us. Keep him satisfied." Megan dropped the phone onto the bed, numbness spreading through her. They didn't care about her at all, only about the money tied to her suffering. She wrapped her arms around herself, a defense against the emptiness threatening to swallow her alive. She thought of her father, her hero, whose sudden death left her unprotected and vulnerable to the wolves now dictating her fate. She wished he were here to tell her she wasn't alone, but wishes were for children, and she had been forced to grow up the moment her signature ended her freedom. Hours passed. Moonlight poured into the room but brought no comfort. Megan sat by the window, staring at the city lights, sparkling far away. A world full of possibilities she might never touch again. Just as she allowed a tear to finally fall, she noticed the front gates opening. A sleek, black car arrived. She leaned closer, breath catching. James walked out of the mansion and toward it, and a woman stepped out. Beautiful, confident, dressed like she belonged to his world in a way Megan never could. Megan watched in horror as the woman cupped James's cheek, brushed her fingers over his lips, and kissed him like he was hers. They laughed softly, stepped into the car together, and drove off into the night, leaving the bride alone on her wedding night. Her chest caved inward, and a quiet sob cracked through the room. She pressed both hands to her mouth to suffocate the scream, threatening to escape. Why wasn't she enough? What crime had she committed except being born in the skin she loved? Until now. She curled onto the edge of the bed, tears soaking into the expensive sheets that didn't deserve her pain. Her wedding band felt like a shackle, cold against her skin. Every second he stayed away carved another scar into her heart, but somewhere inside the wreckage of her hope, a spark ignited, small, fierce. Megan forced herself to sit up straight and wipe her tears. "One day, you will see my worth," she whispered into the darkness, her voice raw but unbreakable. "One day, you will regret every moment you made me feel invisible." Her words didn't shake. They vowed. A queen's promise whispered in the night. Yet even as she swore to overcome the pain, something else stirred inside the mansion walls. A secret locked behind a closed office door, a contract hidden under James's name, a truth she had never been told, a truth so dangerous that if she discovered it, the entire foundation of this marriage would explode. And in that moment, as she closed her eyes and tried to breathe away the agony, James walked back into the mansion hours later, lipstick still staining his shirt collar, unaware that the woman he had just broken was the very woman who held the power to destroy him. The real reason James married Megan was about to surface, and it would be the first crack in his heart of stone. 2. The echoes of that lipstick-stained night still lingered when James finally stepped into the mansion, giving Megan only a passing glance before disappearing upstairs without a word. Morning arrived with cruel irony, sunlight streaming across her face while darkness clung to her heart. Megan woke up to a house filled with silence, every polished surface reflecting a woman who was physically present but emotionally erased. She made breakfast the way she had always done, scrambled eggs, toast, and the type of coffee James liked, but his plate remained untouched. Hours later, the housekeeper removed the cold food without acknowledgement of the effort behind it. Megan watched it all with a soft smile masking devastation because she'd learned quickly that tears earned her no comfort here. Each day, she walked the endless hallways like a ghost wearing a queen's crown. When she tried to greet James at the door, he brushed past her like she was nothing more than a breeze. The scent of expensive wine clung to him every night, mixed with luxury perfume that certainly didn't belong to her. Megan wasn't naive. She knew he was seeking another woman's warmth instead of the vows he shared with her. But she still left dinner waiting on the table, with tenderness stitched into every detail, praying he might one night sit down and notice the love she poured into silence. James's insults weren't always spoken. Sometimes they lived in the way he refused to look up when she entered a room, or how he stepped aside as though her presence polluted the air. Yet Meghan carried herself with the grace of a queen, even when treated like a servant of coincidence. Her melanin shimmered under the chandeliers, each step exuding elegance he foolishly chose to ignore. She didn't fight back because her heart refused to learn hatred, even while his actions tried shaping her into bitterness. Her stepfamily visited often, wearing smug smiles and greedy hunger. They checked bank transfers before asking how Meghan was doing. "Keep James happy," they'd whisper sharply, their smiles never reaching their eyes. "Remember why you married him. Don't mess this up." Meghan bowed her head politely, not because she accepted their cruelty, but because she was too exhausted to keep defending herself against a war she didn't start. Night after night, she tucked herself into a cold bed, hugging a pillow to fill the void where love should have lived. The mansion felt endless but suffocating, every chandelier a spotlight on her loneliness, every marble floor echoing the sound of her own footsteps because no one walked beside her. She often paused by the nursery room that once belonged to James's childhood, staring at the empty crib like a forbidden dream. She imagined joy filling that room, baby laughter, small footsteps, a family complete. But reality reminded her the man who should help her build that happiness believed she wasn't worthy of even a thank you. One evening, Meghan heard voices upstairs, laughter carefree and loud, a sound James never shared with her. Her heart pulled her toward the noise, fragile and terrified. She stopped outside his office door and froze as his voice cut through her. "I'll never love her." A pause. A chuckle, then louder, colder. "She's temporary, a placeholder. One day I'll replace her with someone who belongs at my side." The words sliced through her skin, deeper than any blade. She covered her mouth to stifle the sob threatening to betray her strength. She backed away slowly, every step shattering the hope she buried so carefully. Her heart didn't break. It detonated. She slipped into her room, locked the door, and pressed her forehead to the wood as her breathing trembled uncontrollably. She didn't deserve this. She wasn't worthless. She wasn't disposable. Meghan curled into her bed as tears soaked into the pillow once more. But this time, the sadness came with fire beneath it, a burning desire to stand tall despite his cruelty. The next morning, Meghan dressed in a soft silk dress, her favorite, because even if James refused to see her beauty, she would not allow him to strip her of it. She walked downstairs with her head high, just in time to see a young female employee handing James a file. His eyes softened when he looked at the girl, a softness Meghan never received. The jealousy cutting through her wasn't born from insecurity, but from the injustice of giving so much love to someone who treated her as invisible. Still, she breathed through it. She reminded herself dignity was her weapon. Later that day, Meghan went to the garden for fresh air. Her fingers brushed over flower petals, finding peace in softness where life still embraced her. She looked up at the sky, whispering a question she didn't dare speak aloud. How long can a heart survive being unloved? She didn't know the answer, but she refused to let her pain bury her spirit. Hours stretched into nights again, James gone more frequently than home, leaving a trail of heartbreak behind. Meghan's reflection in the mirror told a story she didn't want to accept. Her eyes were losing their sparkle. She touched her skin gently, recalling how proud she once was of her melanin, dark, rich, glowing. Now she felt like he had turned it into something rejected, something he couldn't stomach. But inside, she reminded herself, her skin was royalty. Her ancestors carried victory. No cold-hearted CEO could erase her worth. One night, as she descended the stairs to retrieve a forgotten scarf, she heard James's voice once more. Lower, meaner, dripping venom into her already tired soul. "My plan will be done soon," he told the same friend from before. "Once the deal is finalized, she can leave. She means nothing." The world stopped spinning for Megan. She leaned against the wall to steady the dizziness crashing over her. So that was it. She was not just unloved, she was temporary by design. A contract disguised as a marriage. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as dread twisted into anger. She wanted to confront him, scream, question, demand truth, but her voice refused to speak. Her legs carried her quietly back to her room instead, the walls watching her crumble again. She stared at her wedding ring, a symbol of promises that had never existed. Slowly, she slid it off. The indentation left behind was a bruise of lies. Yet even as despair consumed her, fate sharpened its teeth. Because the universe was tired of watching Megan suffer. Because storms always break before a sunrise. Because hearts like hers were built for miracles. As she stood near the window, wiping tears that had dried too many times to count, her vision blurred, and for a moment she thought she imagined the feeling, a strange shift, a sudden warmth low in her stomach, a flutter she had never felt before. Her hand moved to her belly. Something was different. Something was beginning, something that would soon rewrite every rule James thought he controlled. That night, the mansion was quiet except for the ticking clock and the faint glow of moonlight brushing over the polished floors as Megan reviewed documents for the company, trying to prove her importance even if no one recognized it. Her heart was still sore from overhearing James say she meant nothing, yet she chose to hold her head high and focus on growth, progress and survival in a marriage that kept pushing her into darkness. She told herself that emotional wounds can heal with accomplishments, that success could be her loudest revenge. Meanwhile, James sat in his penthouse office far away, staring at a report Megan had finished for him. More perfect than any assistant had ever delivered, and the unsettling truth crept into his mind that he needed her more than he would ever admit. He tried brushing off the thought, shaking his head as if it were a nightmare, but the undeniable glow of her presence lingered like perfume in his thoughts. From the corner of the room, his friend Victor smirked knowingly and asked why a man who swore he didn't care kept staring at his wife's work with that strange flicker in his eyes. James denied everything, calling Megan just a forced responsibility, but Victor's raised eyebrow said he wasn't convinced, planting doubt right into James's pride. He threw himself into whiskey to quiet the storm inside his chest, but the alcohol only sharpened the ache that he didn't want to name. His hands trembled, as if his body understood something his stubborn heart refused to feel. That Megan, the woman he once dismissed, was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. Back home, Megan represented the company in a major meeting James skipped without warning, and her voice flowed with confidence and warmth, captivating every room she stepped into. She negotiated fearlessly, surprising even herself as investors leaned forward, drawn not only to her business brilliance but to her graceful presence that commanded attention without trying. Each compliment she received tightened something inside James when he later watched the recorded footage, a bitterness sharp enough to slice through his ego like a blade. Seeing men admire his wife sparked a fire of possessiveness he didn't understand, a burn in his veins that whispered she belonged by his side, not admired by others from afar. For the first time since their wedding, he truly noticed how she walked, shoulders poised like royalty, hips swaying with natural allure, eyes shining with a resilience he couldn't break even with his cruelty. Her melanin shimmered like gold under corporate lights, and her soft smile made him clench his jaw with frustration at how effortlessly she pulled people toward her. At night, when he tried to sleep, her laughter played in his head like an unshakable echo, her scent haunting him with a sweetness he had once refused to acknowledge. He punched his pillow in irritation, wondering why the hell a woman he didn't want was suddenly invading every corner of his mind. But the truth was already brewing beneath his denial. The more she avoided him emotionally, the more he craved the attention he once despised. Megan remained calm around him, polite yet distant, and that quiet grace was melting the ice around his heart grain by grain. He caught himself watching her pour tea, tucking her curls behind her ear, humming softly while working. Tiny moments becoming dangerous temptations that made him look away before she caught him staring. His chest tightened every time she smiled at someone else, especially when she didn't spare him even a glance. James started drinking more, convinced the whiskey would numb the confusion building in his veins, but instead, it magnified his longing until it burned. One night, staggering through the front door, the world spinning around him, he found her waiting again. Her usual silent gesture of kindness, despite all the ways he had hurt her. Her beautiful brown skin glowed under the chandelier, and her eyes widened with concern when she saw him struggle to take off his jacket. Megan stepped closer, steadying him with soft hands that felt like warmth against his cold exterior, and something inside him cracked, fragile, unfamiliar, terrifying. He stared into her eyes as though seeing them for the very first time, not as something unworthy, but as the most captivating feature he'd ever stumbled upon. Her breath hitched when his fingers brushed accidentally against hers, setting off sparks neither of them had prepared for. His scent, expensive cologne laced with liquor, filled the space between them, and his resolve collapsed with the weight of desire he could no longer deny. Megan whispered his name gently, trying to help him walk properly, but he pulled her closer, as if his body made a decision his brain refused to accept. His lips hovered dangerously near her neck, and the shock of his nearness sent a tremble down her spine. She tried stepping back, confused, knowing this wasn't him. This wasn't the cold man who refused to even look at her, but his arms tightened around her waist, anchoring her against his chest. His heartbeat thundered through her, wild and unsteady, and her own pulse reacted against her will. Their eyes locked, breaths tangled, and the air between them became heavy with something fiery, forbidden, inevitable. He didn't speak, but his desire poured from the way his gaze devoured her beauty up close, lips parted, eyes glazed with hunger he couldn't mask. Megan's heart raced like a scared but hopeful bird, confused whether she should resist or let this impossible moment answer all the nights she cried alone. The drunken heat inside James snapped the chains he had tied around his feelings, and he leaned in, claiming her mouth with a desperate kiss that tasted of longing and pain he had buried too deep. Megan froze at first, shocked, breath stolen, then melted slowly into the kiss her heart had always begged for but never believed she'd receive. Her fingers clutched his shirt, torn between the fear of being used again and the sweet ache of finally being seen. His kissing deepened, fierce and impatient, as though he needed her to breathe. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, lips never leaving hers, carrying her toward the bedroom he had denied her so many lonely nights. Clothes rustled, breaths quickened, and every step toward the bed felt like crossing a line neither could ever return from. He laid her down with trembling urgency, worshipping every inch of her like a man starved of touch. Megan gasped when his hands traced the curves he once ignored, and a tear slid from the corner of her eye, not from sadness this time, but from finally feeling wanted. This was what she dreamed of through sleepless, aching nights. The moment he'd need her, crave her, choose her. But even through the heat of passion, a fear sparked deep in her chest. What if this was temporary, a hallucination fueled by alcohol, a mistake he'd wake up hating in the morning? What if her heart was about to break again, more violently than ever before? His lips traveled to her neck, breath hot and unsteady, whispering her name like a secret he never meant to reveal. The walls between them were falling, crashing down one kiss at a time, unveiling a side of him that Megan had never known existed. A side full of need, hunger, and raw emotion. Her body trembled beneath his touch, but her mind screamed a silent prayer that this wasn't just lust fueled by drunken confusion. Because if he broke her again after this night, she wasn't sure her soul would survive the impact, just as passion surged to a point of no return. James suddenly paused, frozen above her, chest heaving, eyes filled with a storm no words could describe. And in that fragile moment, one truth hovered like lightning. This night would change everything, but whether it would save her heart or destroy her completely was still terrifyingly unknown. James's breath trembled against her lips as if desire itself had finally defeated the cold empire he built inside his heart. And Megan felt the universe stop spinning the moment his hands cupped her face with a hunger he could no longer hide, every kiss pouring out all the feelings he swore he didn't have. His touch traveled down her skin with a reverence that brought heat rushing through her body, and the very same man who once turned away from her beauty now clung to her like she was his only source of life. Megan's heart fluttered wildly, disbelieving that this moment was real. The man she had married out of duty was now gazing at her like she was the only thing he'd ever desire. Their breaths mixed, warm and fast, and every brush of his lips deepened the fire blooming inside her chest. She kissed him back, with all the love she had hidden for so long, her fingers gripping the back of his neck, as though she feared he'd disappear if she let go. His chest pressed against hers, strong and warm, and the rhythm of their racing hearts created a music she never dreamed she'd hear. The sound of finally being wanted. The room filled with the soft rustle of sheets and the whispered longing of two souls who had spent too long pretending they weren't meant for each other. His lips traced her shoulder, leaving a trail of heat that made her shiver, while his hands roamed slowly, as if memorizing the curves he once ignored. Megan's tears slipped quietly into her hair. Tears of hope, of astonishment, of a heart finally being acknowledged after being frozen and forgotten for far too long. She had begged God in silence for just one chance to feel loved by him, and now that it was happening, she wanted time to stop so she could stay in this miracle forever. James kissed those tears away without thinking, his voice raw when he murmured her name, like he was tasting the truth for the first time. The passion between them was no longer a flame. It was wildfire, fierce and unstoppable, consuming every part of their bodies and all the years of distance between them. He held her like something rare, something delicate, something he feared he might lose if he wasn't careful. Their bodies fit perfectly together, as if destiny itself had been waiting for this night to finally stitch their hearts into one. The walls they both built came crashing down with every touch, every sigh, every heartbeat. Megan arched into him, feeling cherished, treasured, words she never thought would belong to her in this marriage. James breathed her in like her warmth was the only truth in a world full of lies, and even through his drunken haze he felt something inside him break open, something terrifying, something beautiful. His mouth brushed her ear, whispering softly that she was incredible, and Megan nearly forgot how to breathe because she never imagined he would ever speak to her with such awe. Wrapped in each other's arms, the moonlight painted their love story across the sheets, marking a moment that neither of them could erase, no matter how hard they tried later. When their bodies finally stilled, limbs tangled, breath uneven, Megan rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart, proof that he was human beneath the ice. His fingers slipped into her curls and stroked gently, as if comforting her even in half-sleep, and she felt a warmth bloom through her entire soul. She closed her eyes with a smile, whispering a tiny thank you to the night for giving her what she had prayed for since the day she married him. One real moment of love. The darkness wrapped around them softly, protective and quiet, and for the first time since she stepped into this marriage, Megan drifted to sleep with peace instead of tears. But peace rarely lasts when a heart like James's is involved. Morning sunlight crashed through the curtains too boldly, exposing all the truths the night allowed. Megan woke first, smiling as she stared at the man beside her, the man who finally touched her like she mattered. His arm draped over her waist made her blush softly, and she reached to gently trace the outline of his hand, wanting to freeze the moment before reality ruined it. She turned toward him with hope shining in her eyes, her heart whispering that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. But James's brows furrowed even before his eyes opened, as if his body remembered chaos before his mind did. And the moment he fully woke, horror flickered through his gaze. He looked at Megan in his bed, naked, close, real, and something cold and familiar slammed back into place inside him. He pulled his hand away instantly, breaking every thread of comfort she still held onto. Megan's smile faltered, confusion replacing her joy as he sat up quickly, running a shaking hand over his face like he had committed a crime unthinkable. The air turned icy, fear creeping into Megan's bones. She tried reaching out to him, whispering his name gently, reminding him of the tenderness they shared just hours ago. But he flinched from her touch, flinched from the truth, flinched from himself. He stood abruptly, grabbing his discarded shirt, avoiding her gaze like she was a mistake he could erase by simply looking away. Megan sat up slowly, disbelief tightening around her ribs like a vice. Her voice cracked as she tried to speak, asking him to say something, anything, to make her believe the night wasn't just a cruel joke played on her heart. But James's silence was louder than a scream. He finally spoke, not with the voice that kissed her through the night, but with the voice that had stabbed her heart since the beginning. This never happened. The words struck like lightning, ripping her open from the inside out. Megan shook her head, tears instantly flooding her eyes, choking on the shock that shattered everything she cherished. How could he erase something so beautiful, something so true? How could he look at her like she was nothing again, after holding her like everything just hours ago? James buttoned his shirt stiffly, his face cold, but his hands trembled, betraying the war he refused to admit he was fighting. Megan wrapped the blanket around her body, feeling exposed in every possible way. Her chest screamed for air, her heart trying to keep beating through the cracks. She watched silently as he walked toward the door, each step tearing her further apart, because she knew once he left that room pretending nothing had changed, she would be alone again. More alone than before. Because now she knew exactly what love from him tasted like, and he was snatching it away. He paused only once, hand on the door handle, shoulders tight like he wanted to turn back, like he wanted to stay, like he wanted to choose her. But his pride, that awful ironclad pride, won again. He forced himself forward, disappearing behind the door, shutting it without looking back. Megan's tears fell freely then, crashing into her shaking hands as she clutched the blanket against her chest, wishing she could tear her own heart out so she wouldn't feel the pain. Last night was love. This morning was rejection. And that contrast was a wound deeper than betrayal. But heartbreak wasn't the only thing born in that room. Because deep inside her, beneath the sorrow and confusion, a new life had already taken root. Silent, fragile, powerful. The consequence of that night was already growing, and when the truth finally came to light, James Blackwood's entire world would never be the same again. Weeks drifted forward like slow-moving storms, and Megan, still recovering from the emotional whiplash of their night together, began noticing something different about herself. morning nausea that curled her stomach before sunrise, a heaviness inside her body that wasn't sadness for once, and a fluttering hope she was too afraid to give a name. She stood in the bathroom, gripping the pregnancy test so tightly it nearly snapped, her reflection showing a woman who was terrified and thrilled in the same breath. When the positive lines glowed boldly, her heart did the same, racing as if trying to whisper a promise. You are carrying love, even if he refuses to give it. She pressed both hands over her belly, tears spilling, because this tiny life meant she wasn't alone anymore. She imagined a soft heartbeat, a child with her strength, and maybe even his stubborn eyes, a baby who would finally give her a reason to stay standing. But the glow of joy warred with a sharp fear. What if James rejected not only her, but their child too? Megan took a deep breath and walked to the dining hall, where James sat scrolling his phone, cold fingers flicking across a glass screen that received more attention than his wife ever had. Breakfast sat untouched beside him, pancakes she made with trembling hands, trying to add sweetness to a marriage drowning in bitterness. She swallowed the knot in her throat and said his name softly, hoping today would be different, that maybe the memory of their passion would have softened him even slightly. But when he looked up, his eyes were steel again, guarded like he regretted letting her see any warmth at all. She tried again, her voice stronger but still fragile. James, there's something you need to know. Without raising his gaze from the phone, he muttered, Say it fast. I have a meeting. Her heart cracked at how easily he dismissed her existence, yet she refused to let fear silence her. Not this time. Gathering every ounce of courage, her voice steadied as she confessed, I'm pregnant. Silence slammed into the room, heavy, suffocating, more powerful than any scream. James froze, fingers pausing mid-scroll, eyes slowly lifting to hers with disbelief, twisting his expression into something unrecognizable. His chair scraped harshly against the marble floor as he stood, staring at her like she'd spoken the most impossible words on earth. No, he whispered with a harsh breath, shaking his head like he could deny biology itself. Not with you. The sentence cut deeper than every insult before, because this wasn't just about her anymore. Megan instinctively wrapped her arms around her stomach, shielding the baby from his rejection, a silent vow that she would protect this precious heartbeat even if its father couldn't. James stumbled back a step, chest rising and falling fast as panic devoured him. Not excitement, not pride, just fear fueled by the walls he'd built around his frozen heart. He grabbed his phone and keys and stormed out of the room, every slammed footstep echoing his refusal to face reality. Megan didn't chase him this time. Instead, she sat down, her hands trembling as she whispered to her unborn child that they were already loved more than anything else in this world. But the ache in her chest grew like a storm, because she had hoped, even just a little, that their night of passion meant something to him too. She remembered how he held her like she was oxygen, and now he looked at her like she was the problem. Tears dripped into her lap, but she wiped them away, forcing herself to stay strong. Her baby needed a mother who wouldn't break, even if the father did. Hours later, James leaned against his car outside, hands buried in his hair, breath uneven as memories of their night crashed against him like tidal waves. He remembered the softness of her lips, the heat of her touch, the way she whispered his name like it meant something, and it terrified him. Because if that night meant something, then he was losing control. He couldn't admit that. Not yet. He slammed his fist against the car, anger at himself burning hotter than any hatred he ever directed at her. But instead of returning home to confront his emotions, he drove away, leaving Megan with questions that stabbed like needles under her skin. Megan's phone buzzed again, her stepmother calling non-stop, sensing opportunity like a thief sniffing out unlocked treasure. Megan turned the phone off. For the first time, she wasn't going to allow anyone to control her decisions as a mother. She walked into the nursery room, a place she had only imagined for lonely comfort. And her heart warmed imagining tiny clothes, soft blankets, bedtime stories whispered under dim lights. She pressed her ear to her belly, wishing she could hear the heartbeat already. Her baby was the only blessing this marriage had created, and she clung to that. But even as hope blossomed, a frightening thought slid into her mind. Would James try to take this child away from her? When James finally returned late that night, he didn't go to his room. He stood quietly outside her door, listening to the soft melody she hummed to her belly. Something inside him cracked, a tiny fracture in the ice that kept him distant from everything human. He pressed his forehead to the door, torn between wanting to walk inside and wanting to run forever. Megan didn't know he was there. She continued humming, unaware that the sound was planting seeds in his heart he didn't know how to uproot. The next morning arrived with its own storm. Megan had a doctor's appointment, the first ultrasound. She told herself James wouldn't come, that expecting anything from him would only breed more disappointment. But as she sat in the waiting room, fingers shaking around her purse strap, James walked in, breathless, late. But he came. His suit still crisp, but his eyes a battlefield of fear and something softer pushing through. Megan's eyebrows lifted in disbelief, but she turned away, respecting her own dignity at last. Inside the ultrasound room, the doctor placed gel on her belly and moved the device gently across her glowing skin. The screen flickered to life, and there it was. A small shape, a tiny miracle. Then a sound filled the room. Thump, 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 thump. The baby's heartbeat, loud and fast, like it was shouting its existence. Megan's eyes filled instantly, her smile trembling as pure love overflowed through her veins. James's breath caught, sharp, painful, as that sound shattered every lie he told himself. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He wasn't just a cold husband. He was a father. And he couldn't unhear that heartbeat even if he tried. Tears slipped from the corner of his eyes before he even realized they were there. His hand moved on instinct, reaching for Megan, reaching for the life inside her. But she flinched away. His touch was no longer welcome. His regret came too late. The doctor congratulated them both cheerfully, unaware of the silent war inside the room. When Megan sat up, she didn't look at James. She simply clutched the ultrasound photo to her chest like a shield and a promise. James opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words found their way out. Megan walked past him, her beauty glowing brighter than ever, not because of him, but because motherhood was her crown. For the first time, James realized she wasn't waiting for him anymore. She wasn't begging. She wasn't hoping he would change. She was rising without him, and that terrified him more than the idea of being a father. As Megan stepped through the clinic doors, a strange figure watched from a distance. Someone who knew Megan long before James ever did. Someone who wasn't supposed to be here. The moment their eyes nearly met, the mysterious figure turned and disappeared. James wasn't the only one about to lose control. And this heartbeat was just the beginning of fate rewriting everything. James stood there frozen, the words, "I'm pregnant," still haunting him like a ghost he tried to outrun, and for days he told himself it couldn't be real, that Megan must be lying to trap him, that fate would never dare tie him permanently to a woman he refused to love. But deep inside, a restless battle raged, something he couldn't silence anymore, fear, guilt, and curiosity. And he found himself outside the hospital without remembering how he even drove there, his heart pounding like he was the one about to receive life-changing news, while Megan walked through the doors alone, holding her file against her belly like a fragile shield, not expecting him, not looking for him, not hoping for him this time. And that hurt more than her tears ever did, so he followed her quietly, unsure if he was welcome, unsure if he even deserved to be here, but something stronger than ego pushed him forward. The truth was growing inside her, and he needed to face it. And Megan sat in the ultrasound room, fingers shaking slightly as she placed them over her small bump, whispering silently to the tiny heartbeat within her, promising strength even if love didn't come. Blinking back tears, telling herself she didn't care if James showed up, pretending she wasn't praying for him to walk through that door, inhaling deeply when the doctor entered, preparing herself to smile for her baby, even if her heart cracked beneath the pressure of bravery, telling herself she didn't need James, but she couldn't silence the ache of wishing, just once, he would choose her without hesitation. And then the door creaked open. Megan's breath caught. She almost didn't turn, scared that hope would make a fool of her again. But when she did look back, there he was, James, hands in fists, eyes conflicted, his chest moving like he couldn't breathe, saying not a word, but the fact that he came saying everything she had waited months to hear. Yet she couldn't show relief. She wouldn't let him see how easily her heart fluttered for him, shifting her gaze away, pretending the sight of him didn't make warmth rush through her veins, and James took a slow step inside, as though walking into a sacred space he had no right to enter, expecting her to smile, to beam with happiness, because that's what she always did. Forgive too easily, instead finding her cold, silent, distant, and it hit him like a punch because she wasn't running after him anymore, wasn't begging him with her eyes to stay, instead protecting her peace. And he felt the sting of being on the other side of rejection for the first time. And the doctor dimmed the room lights, the screen flickering to life as gel touched Megan's stomach, and she flinched slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of realizing this moment was bigger than anything she had ever lived through, and James's eyes locked on the screen expecting emptiness, but then a small form appeared, crowned in soft, echoing shadows, making his heart stumble and his throat tighten as he inched closer, unable to stop himself, and then the heartbeat filled the room, that tiny, fierce rhythm hammering through the speakers like a miracle refusing to be ignored. Fast, powerful, alive, a spark of existence created by a night he tried to erase, and James softened instantly, his eyes widening in raw disbelief, lips parting, stolen of air, because that rhythmic thumping wasn't just sound. It was proof that life didn't care about his arrogance, his denial, his walls, and he wasn't looking at a deal, wasn't looking at a mistake. He was looking at his child, while Megan noticed the change, the shattering of the ice inside his gaze, pain flickering inside her too, because this was what she wanted from him for so long, but she had given up hoping he would ever give it, hating that even now, seeing him overwhelmed, gave her heart a reason to ache with new desire. And the doctor smiled softly, unaware of the emotional war unfolding, saying, "Both mother and baby are perfectly healthy." Her voice warm with reassurance, Megan's shoulders dropping with relief. Finally something went right, turning her face slightly, and James catching sight of her glowing smile, a smile filled with a love strong enough to raise worlds, and his chest ached because that love wasn't for him anymore. It was for the child he didn't deserve, and he swallowed hard, realizing how many nights she cried alone while he pushed her away, reaching out instinctively, wanting to be close, wanting to anchor himself to the moment before it slipped. His fingers hovering near her shoulder, just inches away from connection, but Megan saw him from the corner of her eye and moved away, not rudely, not angrily, just with exhaustion, refusing to beg for his touch anymore, refusing to crumble again. And that simple shift, that gentle refusal, crushed him far more than if she had screamed, because he finally understood he wasn't losing a wife who loved too much. He was losing the only person who ever loved him at all, and his voice cracked as he tried to speak, but nothing came out, wanting to say sorry, to admit he was scared, to ask her for another chance. But apologies felt too small for wounds he caused. while Megan remained calm, wiping tears of joy that weren't about him, thanking the doctor, standing up and walking around him like he was just another stranger blocking the door, and James followed her through the hallway, breaths frantic, mind racing, every second she took without him feeling like punishment he earned, watching her step into the elevator, rushing forward, but the doors slid shut between them, and he saw his reflection in the metal. A man who finally wanted, but might already be too late, pressing his palm to the cold steel, heart pounding with a new fear, not of responsibility, but of losing her forever. And for the first time in his life, James's power meant nothing. He couldn't buy Megan's heart, couldn't command her forgiveness, couldn't erase the tears she shed when he wasn't looking, standing there breathless, desperate, realizing that the heartbeat he heard wasn't just their child's. It was his own heart waking up, terrified that it had recognized love only after breaking it. But Megan walked away anyway, knowing loving him shouldn't feel like begging for existence, stepping into the crisp air outside, hugging her belly like armor, not seeing James rush down the stairs, not hearing him call her name, not turning as he stumbled into the parking lot just seconds too late, and rain began to fall. Soft at first, then heavier, as if the sky mourned the love slipping from his hands. Megan getting into a taxi, eyes shut tight, trying to silence the memories of that one night. He held her like she mattered, reminding herself she wasn't alone anymore. She had her baby, and that was enough, while James stood in the rain, soaked, shaking, staring at the taxi driving away. And something inside him snapped. The cold CEO the world feared feeling powerless and terrified, because the only thing that ever made him feel alive was leaving him behind, his jaw clenching, heart roaring, refusing to let her slip away. Not now, not when she carried the one thing that could change him completely, taking a step forward, then another, the storm intensifying. And so did his determination. Because this wasn't over, not even close, since that heartbeat had awakened something unstoppable inside him. And he was about to prove it. James stood in the mansion, doorway drenched from the storm outside, chest rising and falling as if he had run miles, heart still echoing the ultrasound's heartbeat through every vein in his body, his mind replaying the moment Megan stepped away from his touch, a memory that burned like ice in his chest, and he walked inside with one realization pounding louder than any thunder. He couldn't lose her, not when he finally wanted her, not when he finally understood what she had always been to him. He showered quickly, changed out of his soaked clothes, and found himself drifting toward her room like gravity finally knew its purpose. And there she was, lying on her side, hand resting protectively over her belly, as if shielding their child from the world, her eyelashes resting like delicate feathers against cheeks that had known too many tears because of him. And he stood there quietly, studying her, memorizing the softness he once refused to acknowledge, wanting to reach out and brush her cheek, wanting to kiss the apology he could never speak, wanting to beg for a chance he was terrified he didn't deserve. He turned away before he woke her, but the hollowness inside him grew sharper, slicing guilt into every breath he took, because for the first time, James feared the silence more than her anger. The next morning he woke before sunrise, a rare occurrence for the man who used to work late and return even later just to avoid her presence. Now he wanted to be there for every moment, every craving, every heartbeat that lived inside her. He stood awkwardly in the kitchen, trying and failing to prepare breakfast because he had never cooked a single meal in his life, cursing burned eggs and spilled juice, but refusing to give up because this time his effort had meaning. His effort had a name and a heartbeat, and when Megan finally walked in, dressed in a soft maternity dress that hugged her curves gracefully, she paused, stunned to see him standing over a messy counter, holding a tray of sloppy pancakes like trophies, and he felt his heart leap with hope that she might smile, even the smallest one, but instead her expression remained calm, polite, distant, like a queen acknowledging a stranger who once broke her crown, and he swallowed the disappointment, reminding himself that trust wasn't built overnight, especially when he was the one who destroyed it. She thanked him quietly and ate slowly, keeping her guard high, and every gentle rejection silently carved a deeper mark in his chest, making him realize love was a war he had only just begun to fight. Days turned into weeks, and James found himself coming home earlier, watching Megan when she didn't notice, mesmerized by how pregnancy only made her stronger, more beautiful, more radiant, how she hummed to their baby with a tenderness that made him ache with longing to belong to that softness too, longing to be the man she once dreamed he could be. Jealousy sparked hot and violent inside him when nurses placed gentle hands on her belly during checkups, speaking to her with kindness while he stood back as an outsider in his own story, because for the first time, someone else was giving her comfort he failed to offer. Someone else was making her feel seen. He started buying her gifts, flowers bursting with color, soft blankets, expensive maternity clothes, anything that reminded him he could try. But Megan accepted everything with a graceful thank you and then returned to her world of quiet independence, leaving him desperate for one more second of her attention, for one crack in the wall she built to protect her heart from his carelessness. Each night, she would sit by the window, rubbing her belly, whispering stories to their baby, and he would stand in the doorway, wanting to join her, but too afraid to speak, because words weren't enough anymore. One evening, the pressure inside him broke free. He stepped into the room, heart trembling with every heartbeat, eyes filled with a truth he couldn't hold back any longer. "I don't hate you. I hate myself," he whispered, voice raw, stripped of ego for the first time in his life, and those words hung in the air between them like a confession carved from regret. But Megan didn't melt like she once would have. She didn't cry or rush to comfort him like she always did before. She just stared at him, studying him, searching for the sincerity he denied her for so long, trying to decide if this sudden transformation was real or only a moment of guilt that would disappear again, and James felt the sting of her doubt. But he didn't blame her, not anymore. Silence wrapped them like a curtain, heavy, intense, and his chest tightened with fear that she might never let him close again, that he waited too long to feel what she felt from the very beginning. Then suddenly Megan gasped, a sharp breath that sliced through the tension like a blade, her hands flying to her belly as a wet warmth rushed down her legs, and her eyes widened in panic as she whispered, "James, my water, it just broke." The words trembling with both fear and excitement, and in that instant, the world around him exploded into chaos. His pulse skyrocketed, adrenaline flooding his veins as he rushed to her side, his hands finally holding her without hesitation, without fear, without distance. And Megan clutched his arm tightly, her breath faltering as another wave of pain surged through her, the baby deciding the time had come, whether love was ready or not. James lifted her gently from the chair, his heart beating louder than the storm from the night he first realized he cared, and panic rattled through him. What if something went wrong? What if he lost both of them before he had the chance to make things right? What if he never heard that heartbeat again? What if love arrived too late to save him? Megan's nails dug into his skin as another contraction hit, and James held her closer, whispering, "I'm right here, I'm not leaving you." And it was the first promise he ever made that carried truth. But Megan's lips trembled, unsure whether to trust the man who once made her feel like she was nothing, unsure whether this sudden devotion was love or desperation, unsure whether she should let her heart believe again when vulnerability could destroy her all over. He scooped her into his arms, carrying her toward the car with a fear so fierce it nearly broke him, rain beginning to drizzle again, as if the sky wanted to witness this turning point too, headlights flashing to life as he sped toward the hospital, both of them breathless, both holding on for different reasons. And as the tires splashed through puddles and the windshield blurred with rain, James glanced at Megan, panting, brave, stunning even in pain. And something inside him clicked with terrifying clarity. This woman was his strength, his redemption, his chance at a life where love existed, and he finally understood that he wasn't just racing toward the hospital. He was racing toward the possibility of losing everything he had only just learned to love. The greatest fear of his life was no longer losing power. It was losing her. And the next moment waiting for them would decide whether love would rise or break one more time. The moment Megan screamed that the baby was coming, everything inside James shattered into raw panic. He didn't care about his reputation, his billion-dollar empire, or the cold armor he had spent years crafting. All he cared about was getting her to the hospital alive, safe, breathing. He held her trembling hand inside the speeding car, whispering over and over that he was there, that he wouldn't leave her again, not even for a heartbeat. Megan's nails dug into his skin as each contraction tore through her body, sweat dripping from her forehead, fear flickering in her eyes. Yet in that agony, she still protected their son within her, a strength James had never understood until watching her fight through the pain for love alone. Nurses rushed them into the delivery room, and he stayed at her side, refusing to step away, even when doctors told him most fathers fainted. James didn't blink. He couldn't. Megan needed him, and he would die before abandoning her again. Every push she gave was a punch to his soul. Every cry from her lips was a sharp reminder of the nights he'd made her cry out of sadness instead of love. His jaw tightened with guilt, tears stinging his eyes as he held her hand against his chest, letting her clutch his heart while she brought new life into the world. Then, the air shifted. A single cry, fierce and powerful, sliced through the room like destiny announcing itself. Their son, their miracle, their greatest proof that love still lived even beneath the ruins of heartbreak. Megan collapsed back into the pillows, breathing fast and broken, cheeks wet from mixed pain and happiness, while James stood frozen, staring at the squirming, tiny king placed into his shaking hands. The moment that heartbeat echoed again, loud, strong, unstoppable, something inside James completely fractured. His knees buckled as he whispered, "My son," like the words alone were too sacred to speak loudly. Tears poured down his face, not the silent type he used to hide, but real raw sobs of a man who realized he was holding the only legacy that ever mattered. Megan watched him, her own heart melting because she saw it, the change she prayed for, the transformation she once begged for. It was real. He wasn't pretending, he wasn't confused. He was a father in love with his child and the mother who gave him that gift. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers, whispering hoarsely, "Thank you. Thank you for giving me a reason to breathe." And then he kissed her, not with desire but with devotion, silently vowing to never again let fear turn him into a coward. Hours later, with baby Noah cradled peacefully between them, James stood before the hospital window, holding his son with absolute pride. Reporters gathered outside once news leaked that the ruthless CEO had become a father, ready to photograph a story the world could barely believe. James didn't shy away. He opened the curtains wider, letting everyone see exactly who held his future. He lifted Noah gently, declaring to the world that this was the heir to the Blackwood Empire. And beside him, Megan watched with soft awe. The man who once looked at her skin and saw difference now looked at her and saw royalty. He turned back to her, voice deep with meaning as he vowed, "From today onward, you are my queen, and he is our king. No one will ever try to take your crown again." For the first time since she married him, Megan felt truly safe, truly chosen, truly loved. It was as if every insult, every lonely night, every tear had led to this moment where he finally recognized her worth, a worth that never needed his approval, only his acceptance. But fate never lets happiness breathe too long without a test. The hospital room door creaked open, slow and unsettling, and Megan's smile faded instantly as her breath hitched in warning. A tall figure stepped inside, casting a shadow that erased the warmth in the air. The expression on James's face hardened as he shifted protectively in front of Megan and the baby, instinct transforming instantly into defense. Megan's pulse raced as the figure walked closer, eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made every hidden memory claw back to life. Someone from her past, a past she had buried, a past she never expected to return, stood inches away, smirking like he owned the right to be there. James clenched his fists, voice dropping dangerously low as he demanded, "Who the hell are you?" The stranger didn't look at James. He looked only at Megan, with a chilling familiarity that made James's blood boil. And then, with a voice that dripped with unfinished history, he said, "Miss me, Megan." The silence that followed wasn't calm. It was the sound of a storm forming, the kind that destroys everything on its path. Megan's tears dried instantly as fear returned to her eyes, the fear James thought he had erased forever. He looked at her, trying to understand the sudden terror shaking her hands as she clutched Noah closer to her heart. One sentence, one secret, one face from yesterday had just threatened tomorrow, and James, newly reborn as a father and husband, was ready to burn the world to protect them. But the stranger wasn't here to ruin the moment. He was here to ruin their entire future. And Megan knew that whatever she had tried to bury was coming back to life. The war for their family had only just begun. The tension in the Blackwood mansion was thick enough to choke, a storm brewing silently in the hallways that Megan had once walked with fear in her heart. But now she moved through it with the quiet strength of a queen who had claimed her throne. Her steps were measured, confident, and every room she passed seemed to hum with the echoes of her victories over the pain and neglect of her past. The soft cries of Noah from the nursery reminded her of everything she had fought for, every tear, every lonely night, every whispered promise to herself that she would rise, that she would never bow again. She carried him in her arms like a shield against the world, the tiny fingers wrapping instinctively around hers, as if even he knew that his mother's strength was unmatched. And yet, no victory could have prepared her for the return of the people who once tried to crush her, the very step family that had mocked her, that had cheered her pain when James first rejected her. They arrived unannounced, like shadows creeping into sunlight, their smiles fake, eyes full of greed and malice. Megan's heart skipped, not from fear, not this time, but from anticipation, the kind that told her something had changed, and this time she was ready. James had been standing nearby, watching her carefully, his arms tight around Noah. His jaw was set, eyes dark with controlled fury, and every fiber of his being screamed against their intrusion. Megan didn't need him to speak, didn't need him to act, because she had learned the power of her presence. But the second her step-family opened their mouths with venomous words, demanding money, mocking her skin, and calling her every cruel name they had whispered in the shadows before her marriage, James's roar echoed through the grand hall. It wasn't just anger. It was the sound of a man who had finally understood the value of love, family, and loyalty. He stepped forward, his presence enough to silence the greedy voices that dared challenge him. And every word he spoke carried the authority of a man who had built an empire, lost nothing, and gained the one person he could never let go. "Leave," he said, voice deep and unwavering, "or you will never see this house again." They hesitated, shocked by the intensity, and then, one by one, they were forced to retreat, their arrogance crumbling against the fortress of James and Megan's united strength. Megan's chest swelled, not with relief alone, but with the fierce pride of a woman who had finally seen the man who once rejected her transform into someone who would fight for her as if his life depended on it, because in truth, it now did. The employees, who had watched quietly from the sidelines, witnessed a side of James they had never imagined. A man not of cold business and ruthless deals, but a man of loyalty, love and honor, who valued the woman beside him above all else. Megan turned toward them, her gaze sweeping across the room with calm grace, and their silence became awe as they realized the story of this woman who had endured so much, yet emerged untouchable. James stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only those nearest could hear, and declared what he had kept inside for far too long. "My wife, Megan Blackwood, the smartest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, the mother of my heir." The words hung in the air like a crown settling onto her head, powerful and permanent. Tears blurred her vision as she held Noah closer, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against her chest, hearing his soft giggles that seemed to echo the victory of life, love and resilience, all in one moment. For the first time, Megan allowed herself to truly exhale, to feel the weight of the years lift from her shoulders, because this was the love she deserved, not the hollow approval of those who had scorned her, but the genuine, unbreakable devotion of the man who had finally learned to see her, to value her, to worship her existence. James reached for her hand, gently intertwining his fingers with hers, the touch electric yet grounding, a reminder of the nights they had shared, the heartbreaks they had survived, and the love that had emerged stronger for every battle. He leaned down to kiss her softly, a kiss filled with promise, respect, and an unspoken vow that no one and nothing would ever threaten this bond again. "You're not just my liking. You're my everything," he whispered, and in that single sentence, every insult, every rejection, every moment of doubt was erased. Megan's eyes shimmered with tears of joy, laughter mingling with the soft cries of Noah, creating a symphony that filled the mansion with life, hope, and triumph. The Black Queen had risen fully, not because James had finally recognized her worth, but because she had always known it, and now the world could see it too. Her power was not in the money, not in the crown, not in the titles, but in the strength that had carried her through every storm, in the love that had refused to bow, and in the family she had built with a man who had once been her coldest enemy and now her fiercest protector. And as the evening light streamed through the grand windows, casting golden rays across the room, Megan looked at James, looked at Noah, and felt a sense of completion she had never known. The mansion no longer felt like a prison or a place of loneliness. It had transformed into a home, a sanctuary, a kingdom where love reigned supreme. The whispers of the past were silenced forever, eclipsed by the laughter of their child and the unshakable bond that tied James and Megan together. In that moment, Megan understood that true power was not taken. It was earned, and she had earned it every single day with every tear, every brave step, and every heartbeat of patience that had brought her here. She lifted Noah high, his tiny eyes sparkling with innocence and the promise of tomorrow, and whispered softly, "We are unbreakable." And James pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, feeling the truth of her words in his own soul. This was the crown she had waited for, the victory she had been denied for too long, and the love she had finally claimed for herself. Noah giggled again, a sound that felt like the ringing of bells heralding a new era, and James laughed along, a rich, unrestrained sound that mirrored the joy and relief flooding through their hearts. They were no longer two broken people navigating a cruel world. They were a family, complete, unstoppable, and radiant. Every challenge they had faced, every insult, every betrayal, every shadow of doubt that had once lingered over Megan's life was gone, banished by the fierce light of love, courage, and loyalty. The employees who watched them could only bow inwardly, witnessing the rise of a queen who had been underestimated, mocked, and tested, yet emerged more formidable than anyone had imagined. Megan had not bowed, she had not begged, she had not faltered. She had simply risen, stronger, wiser, and more beautiful than ever. And James, once a man frozen in pride and fear, had become her champion, her protector, and her devoted partner, finally worthy of the love she had always deserved. The last rays of sunlight fell across the mansion as James wrapped his arms around Megan and Noah, holding them close, feeling the warmth of family, the pulse of love, and the triumph of everything they had fought for. Megan leaned into him, letting herself be held fully, and for the first time in her life, she knew that no one could ever take this from her. Her stepfamily, the whispers of the past, the pain of rejection, all of it had been necessary for this moment, for this crown that was hers by right, strength, and heart. She smiled at James, and he smiled back, a silent acknowledgement that together they were unshakable. And as Noah's tiny hand wrapped around Megan's finger, the promise of a future filled with love, joy, and unstoppable power stretched before them like the endless horizon. Megan Blackwood, the Black Queen, had risen, and she would never bow again. Wow, what a transformation! A black woman they once looked down on, now the queen of an empire. Love didn't break her, it crowned her. If Megan's rise inspired you today, drop a Black Queen forever in the comments. Don't forget to like, share this with someone who needs strength, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story of love and victory. Until next time, stay strong, stay beautiful, and stay beyond color.